So I'll start with just a quick introduction of myself. So my name's Scott Russo. I'll be a second year at Owen next year, and I'll be one of the OSDC board members next year. So already using acronyms here, the Owen Strategy and Consulting Club. I'll be one of the 6 board members. And what my role will be is learning and development. So me and 2 other board members, Matt and Colin, will be responsible for getting you prepped for interviews for strategy and consulting roles, if that's something that interests you, specifically the case portion of the interview, as well as the behavioral portion. So we've got a few members of the CMC here, as well as Brian McCann, one of the strategy professors. And then we also have Bennett Hayes and Mike Foster, so Mike graduated in 2017 and Bennett 2019, and they're both currently at BCG. So before we get into working the case, I'm just going to give a quick description of the OSDC and try to hopefully convince you to join the OSDC when you get here in August. So just give a little bit into some of the programming that we'll have scheduled for you guys next year. So this is for first years as well as some second years that want to move into consulting or strategy roles. So we will have a fall symposium on campus in September where we host a number of consultants and managers at a number of the firms that recruit on campus. So they'll all be on campus, or it might be virtual. I'm not quite sure what the details will be, but nonetheless, it's a great opportunity to join some small group breakout sessions with some of these practitioners and really try to understand what they do day to day and maybe a bit of how their firm is distinguished from a few of the others that recruit on campus. Also, some of the programming for case competitions will be funneled through the OSDC. So a few of the firms that recruit on campus host case competitions, and it's a great way to really try to prove yourself and, as a worthy candidate for a number of these firms. So a lot of that will be funneled through the OSDC as well. And then in the prepare section, so as I previously mentioned, we will be responsible for getting you prepped for case interviews, as well as just consulting and strategy interviews overall, because some include some behavioral portions as well. So we'll provide a lot of programming for that, and then also some resume and cover letter assistance. CMC will be big in that piece of the recruiting cycle as well. And then finally in the connect piece there, so we will provide some networking contacts for you guys. So a big portion of consulting and strategy recruiting is reaching out to firms and really trying to get to know some of the practitioners. So we'll be helpful in providing some contacts at a lot of those firms, as well as just kind of coaching you on maybe what opportunities and what firms and what positions might be best for you. So, and like I mentioned, a lot of that will begin right when you get on campus in Mod 1. You'll have the opportunity to join the OSDC at the Owen Club Fair. That will be in August, so just in a couple months here. That's where you'll have the opportunity to join professional clubs as well as non-professional clubs on campus. And then, like I mentioned, a lot of our programming runs Mod 1 all the way through Mod 3, essentially up until interview season. And then before we get started, I will mention that there will be another Working the Case session on July 10th at noon. We'll have 2 Owen alum that currently are at Deloitte. So Morgan, who graduated in 2018, and Jason, who graduated in 2019. And as far as I know, the session will be somewhat similar, but from the perspective of a different firm. So I think with that, though, that's all I have for the OSDC. Certainly encourage you guys to join the club in August, and I will throw it over to Bennett and Mike with what they have.
Cool. Thanks, Scott. I guess it makes sense for Mike and I to just briefly introduce ourselves. And I'll say off the top that I think it's pretty cool that these sessions exist so early. I know Mike and I were both very involved in the OSCC during our time at Owen. Definitely did not put together something this early for folks coming in. So kudos to Scott and team for making this happen. But as Scott mentioned, Bennett Hayes, I'm a consultant at BCG, just about to approach my 2-year mark at the firm. I graduated in 2018 from Owen, focused on strategy, enjoyed my classes with Mr. Brian McCann on this call. And then at BCG, I did intern during my summer in between first and second years, got some great experience there, and then returned obviously full-time immediately after school. My work has focused largely around transformation, both digital and more process changes, but we can dive into that a little bit more. I'll pass it over to Mike to take it from here.
Yeah, thanks, Bennett. Nice to meet everybody on the line virtually. Mike Foster graduated in 2017, which feels like a long time ago, which I guess makes me cold, which kind of stinks, but here we are. Project leader out of the Dallas office of BCG. Have been here, I guess, just coming up on 3 years now. Have kind of worked across a number of functions, doing a number of different things in a number of different industries. So anything from airlines to oil and gas to power and utilities to a chocolate company to, I mean, just, you know, you name it, I've probably done something similar. So it's been a really cool experience and a cool ride. I worked for kind of 6 months the last year in West Africa, so Angola and Nigeria, which was fun. So if you have any kind of questions about working internationally or, you know, what that looks like, more than happy to talk through those as well. So yeah, really looking forward to it. I focus mostly now in energy work. So oil and gas and power and utilities as well, but can speak to any questions you've got across a number of different things as much as I can. So looking forward to it.
Cool. So if you just want to flip ahead to that first slide, Scott, awesome. So I think the goal of today from our perspective is really just to talk you through the case process from our side. Obviously, we can only speak to our experiences. I think you've probably already heard, if you're beginning the consulting recruiting process, the answer, it depends, to a lot of different questions. That's certainly going to apply here. There really are no two cases that are the same. But I think the hope here is just for us to kind of talk through from an individual perspective, you know, as a consultant, what should you be expecting from, you know, getting ready for a case, actually managing the case, being on it, and then all the way through to wrapping it up. So we've broken it into a few different phases here. I think we can take it one by one. Certainly want as much engagement and questions as we go. So feel free to either type something in the chat and we can handle it there. Certainly hop in over the call as well. And then, you know, I think we can manage questions as we go. And then we also have a little time at the end to take any lingering thoughts or questions that may be there. Cool. So Mike, do you want to kick us off here on kind of the initial stages and how you think about staffing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, you know, broadly, you know, I would say at least you know, it can work very differently across very different firms, but even taking a step back, I think, you know, as the case gets sold, you know, it's usually solving kind of a broad problem, right? So whether kind of like Bennett mentioned, that's like a transformation or some sort of, you know, cost of goods sold exercise or a strategic kind of growth plan or a market entry. And so that'll usually get broken up into like little sub problems. So as an example, right, like let's take a market entry as an example. So, okay, we want to, like a case I worked on, we want to take this chocolate product and go into Germany as an example. Well, there's kind of a couple subdivisions of that. It's like, okay, is there like some customer segmentation in Germany we need to think about? Customer preferences? Are there channels in Germany that we need to think about? So should we be selling at kind of high-end chocolate retailers? Should we be selling in grocery stores? Should we be, you know, should we be selling at convenience stores? Those sorts of things. And so you break it down into kind of the little sub buckets. And then typically consultants and associates would get kind of assigned to each of those little sub buckets. And that rolls up into the overall answer. And so kind of the staffing portion would be, okay, we have, you know, these particular modules and these particular kind of, you know, places available based on the work being sold. And that kind of works differently. And so I'll go into a little bit of how it works for us and then how from a couple friends and a few others, how it works for others. I think at least for us, you know, it's a blend of kind of which projects are available. So, you know, people need to keep working and also your preferences also. So, you know, something along the lines of, okay, I really want to get more exposure to kind of market growth work or to organizational design work, or I'm really interested in pharmaceuticals. So let me see if I can try to get something there. I think over the kind of 2 years or 3 years that I've been here, I've been able to kind of do more and more of that. But a lot of times I think it is sort of driven by, you know, or it can be driven by, you know, like you have to work and, you know, what projects are there. And that's going to be different at different times of the year and different kind of in different cycles. So I would say a little bit of that for BCG, there's kind of a blend of a push and pull model. So you do have kind of staffers that are kind of helping you navigate what potential projects might be available, you know, what areas you might be interested in, and trying to help you with that. But I think as you kind of go on in your career, it becomes more of a pull model where you've worked with these people before and you like them. And so they might have something coming up, and you try to reach out a couple weeks in advance if something's coming, and it becomes more kind of pull on you. So and I think that's different. I mean, I don't want to speak to other firms, but there are firms that do 100% pull model, where you have to do a lot of networking to kind of build that for yourself. I think for me, that's happened really naturally. That was actually something I was probably worried about, because I'm not a networker at heart. And so I think at least for us, I think it happens pretty naturally, where, look, if you do good work and you've worked with people before, they'll keep an eye out for you on the next one. But Ben, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but that was kind of my thoughts here.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good overview. And to me, when you're thinking about how do you get yourself on the project that fits your preferences, I think there's a few different ways, beyond what Mike mentioned in terms of how you can do that. I think one way is just getting involved with some of the early proposal work. So before the project actually launches, if you've been involved in putting together that proposal and supporting the team doing that, that's an easy way to just roll right onto a project, because you have the background, you have the context. And if you've proven yourself to that team who's building the proposal, it's often a pretty easy sell to say, hey, I've enjoyed this, really would love to work on this, and get yourself staffed there. I think the other thing to think about, as you move forward in your career as a consultant, is what are the strands that tie different projects together. So, I may have done a project focused on digital transformation, but maybe there was a subcomponent of that involved some work around, Agile. And, if I want to do more work around Agile and I see some projects staffing up that relate to that topic, then I can, even though I was focused on something slightly different in that digital transformation, it's pulling forward that sub experience and saying, hey, I haven't done a ton of this, but I do have exposure. I would like to learn more. Could this be a potential fit skill wise? So I think just thinking critically about, where you want to get to from a project perspective, and whether that's an industry or a functional area or even a team, a group of people you want to work with, and just thinking about what on your current project or what on the projects that are available to you could be useful towards that end goal in your staffing pipeline. I think that's often a way to kind of navigate through and ultimately end up in the space you want to end up in. But I also think from a BCG perspective, I think one of the great parts, as Mike mentioned, is that there is that push model to a degree. And early on, I can speak for myself. I had very little business experience before pre-BCG, so I really couldn't go to a project and say, hey, I have this specific skill set. So that's where that push helped in kind of getting me in the door and getting me on a couple of different projects. And then from there, that's when you can start to, think about what you've done on those projects that would make sense for future engagements. So definitely does vary firm to firm. I think that's an important call out here. And I think it's great that you have, folks from different firms coming on to chat throughout the summer, because they can certainly speak to their models better. But definitely this is I think a key topic for a lot of new consultants, is how you go about getting staffed on a project. And I think, it's definitely something to be mindful of as you get going. We'll pause here if anyone has questions, or Mike, feel free to hop in. Cool. We can jump forward and certainly can backtrack if folks have questions about, don't feel like we have to talk about whatever's on the slide or whatever phase we're in when we're there. Cool. I can start here and then send it over your way, Mike. I think as you start thinking about, how do you actually get ready for a case? I know this during my summer internship was something, I hadn't really thought through. I think I thought a lot about, what type of case I wanted and, where I would get staffed, and then you get that staffing assignment, and then suddenly it's like, okay, what do we do here? And I think at BCG, there's a lot of mechanisms in place to make this as easy as possible. But I think first and foremost, it's going to be talking with your teammates. And sometimes that's going to be a team that's up and running, and then there's, a lot of work that's already been done that you can catch up on. And I think, making a couple quick connections on a Friday before a Monday staffing, just finding 30 minutes with people to get a sense of what's been going on the project, that's probably the most effective thing you can do. They also, in that scenario, will likely send over a bunch of materials that the team has worked on already. Those are good starting points as you start to get up to speed on the work that's been done. I think it becomes a little different if the project is actually kicking off with you on it. Certainly, there's more than likely going to be some proposal work that you can look back through if you weren't involved in that. That can provide a little context for the challenge ahead and kind of where the strategy will focus in the coming weeks. But I think more often than not, my experience at least, and Mike's curious about yours, but more often than not, I've joined work in progress. So it's been really helpful for me to make those connections with the team, get a little context from them, and then do some of my own research. I think that's kind of the second piece here that you'd want to think about, is once you have the actual case context, just making sure that you're filling in any gaps in your own knowledge when it comes to the industry or the functional area. And at least for us, we have a pretty large internal library that can get you up to speed on industries and provide some recent trend data. So I think that's what I've focused on largely after reading case materials, is just digging through that as much as possible. I mentioned how I started with very little business background, so I found a lot of this really useful as I dove into industries that were totally unfamiliar to me. But I think those two things, just kind of the connecting with people on the ground who are doing the work already, and then also doing some knowledge searching through the library that we have internally. Those are kind of the two big things I try to focus on when I'm getting ready for a case. But Mike, curious for any additions you may have there or differences.
Yeah, I think that's right. I've actually, probably my experience has been the opposite way of I've mostly been on cases that have started from day one. I think for me, as a project leader, it's a little bit different. It's mostly about kind of like you're framing out kind of all of the deliverables. You're framing out, okay, I have 8 weeks, 12 weeks, however long I have. And a lot of times I think, cases can be sold on pretty gray area type of questions. And so it's kind of your job to say, okay, how are we going to set up the engagement schedule with the clients to do it? How are we going to get the right data that we need? How are we going to set out the analyses to actually answer these questions? So a little bit different, at least from the project leader side. But yeah, I would say, look, when I was in your shoes, the big thing I worried about is like, okay, how am I supposed to day one show up, and have all the answers? And one thing I would just, clarify or give you a little bit of assurance, is that, there is definitely a grace period of like the first couple of weeks are usually just like getting up to speed and figuring out who's who, and kind of getting everybody kind of on the same page about what we're actually doing and what we're trying to accomplish. So try to get ahead of that, at least on the front side. But it's not like the expectations aren't that you show up knowing every answer to every question, because if you did, they wouldn't need 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 4 months, however long it is. So that was one thing that I think when I was kind of ingoing, I wasn't necessarily sure about kind of how that worked and what the expectations were. So happy to, if there's any kind of questions on that piece, happy to answer those as well. But that'd be the only thing I'd add. Looks like we have a question from Sam S. Are you able to leverage the knowledge network you mentioned from other BCG cases? Yeah, it's a good question. So we can leverage it. So through kind of two resources. One is kind of the knowledge database that Emmett mentioned. And everything there is kind of fully sanitized. So in essence, like any kind of like client specific data or recommendations or strategies that were specific to a particular client, like the actual answers, we obviously those wouldn't be there and would be sanitized. But kind of the broader like frameworks and industry concepts and things of how you actually go about solving some of these problems and kind of like the BCG perspective on certain things, you definitely can leverage. The other thing we have is a dedicated team of experts internally that you can talk to, and they can tell you, hey, look, even if it's not in your industry, right? Like, what are best practices for using particular providers in particular areas if you're looking to say, okay, how can we upskill in digital or something to that effect? So there's always somebody in BCG, is what we always say. There's always somebody, you just have to find them, like the person who's done the work knows it. But again, you couldn't, without kind of express kind of permission from clients. You can't be like, oh, well, X company did this, and so then you should go ahead and do that, because obviously that's competitive and privileged. So, but I don't know if you have anything additional there.
Yeah, I guess the sidebar there to me, and this is slightly off topic from this phase of work, but I think as you actually get on the project and are working day to day, there are countless times where you're going to need expertise from other cases or from past work that BCG has done. So this knowledge network is certainly useful as you kick off a case and as you're trying to get smart individually, but it also is pretty awesome to have that available as you encounter challenges on the case. As Mike said, there's always someone who has that niche expertise that you're seeking. And so a lot of times it just comes down to finding the right person. But I think it's actually been a pleasant surprise for me just how willing everyone is to help out with other casework. If you're the expert for a certain topic, there's never, at least I haven't seen someone punt on having a conversation, even if they're super busy. It's kind of just a piece of work that if you have that expertise, you're going to have to share it with others to help move their work along. So it's actually pretty cool how that works both before and during a case. And certainly, as Mike said, a lot of sanitized materials out there. But as you're talking to BCGers, you'll get the information you need in an unsanitized way. It just may need to be presented differently to the client. Good question, though. All right, anything else here before we move on to kind of the actual day-to-day on the case? Cool. Scott, if you want to flip ahead, and Mike, maybe you want to kick us off on this segment.
Yeah, sure thing. And I think I probably touched on this a little bit in terms of kind of the first couple weeks. But I think for me, in the first week of a case, you should in essence be able to say, okay, here's kind of what my deliverables will be over the timeline. So you're usually working on a work plan, and you're usually thinking about, okay, what analyses do I need to do, and what data do I need to do that? And so in the first, either what we call like week 0, so the week before the first week we're on the ground, or week 1, it's usually about kind of getting the data request out, putting together the work plan, figuring out who like your client kind of counterpart's going to be, and getting introduced to them and developing some kind of working norms. And then also I would say, a lot of times we will start with kind of baseline interviews or kind of baseline understanding of what's going on. So if we're coming in to solve a particular problem, it often helps to go and talk to a few of the people that in the organization that work in those particular areas and that understand it a little bit more deeply, so we can start to get a sense of what data is out there and what kind of context we can get. So that would be kind of the first couple weeks in my mind. And I think in terms of the expectations, if you're joining a case that's already running, I know Bennett's got some more experience there. I think it's more, when I've kind of done that, it's been more about understanding the work that's already been done. If you're taking over from another kind of consultant, making sure that you're connected with them about what they're thinking, like where the analysis has been, and then just kind of getting introduced. And so it becomes about like getting the handover plan going and figuring out the overall context of the case and where you fit in. So that would be what I would say. But Bennett, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to the second point.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that you mentioned might probably apply to, in both scenarios. And there are a couple that I want to drill down a little deeper into. One, I think it's just the asking questions bit. You're not expected to come in and know everything. I think that's something early on for me I struggled with. There was this imposter syndrome going on where I felt like I needed to step in and be, Mr. Consultant and know everything. And in reality, what I've seen over the years is the best consultants are actually the ones who come in and just ask a ton of questions, no matter how stupid they are. There are no stupid questions. But it really is just making sure that you have as much context as possible. And you shouldn't, if there's any doubt, it just eliminate that by asking the question and getting crystal clear on what you're working on and anything else that may be relevant to you. I think that's honestly one of the biggest lessons I've taken away from these 2 years, is just ask a ton of questions. It really gets you further and helps you become proficient in speaking the language and understanding the content sooner. The second piece that Mike mentioned, I think, around team norms, and this is something that may vary a little bit whether you're kicking off a case or joining one that's already running. But I think one thing that we do at BCG that, I guess I probably didn't think about proactively before joining the firm is really making sure that, how people work differently is transparent and out there for the full team to understand right away. So you have a sense of, whether someone likes to work in the morning or the evening, what's the preferred method of communication, when can you expect to be able to sign off comfortably and not expect any emails after a certain time. All those little details, I think, are usually ironed out right away. Or if you're joining a case, the hope is that you can share your preferences soon enough, and there's a kind of a living case document usually that charts everyone else's preferences so that you can get a sense of how the team's working and how you might fit into it. But I think that's really valuable, no matter where you are, just to have those be extremely explicit. I think when you have some ambiguity there, that's where, teaming can start to get a little dicey. So I've found that to be super valuable, just to have very clear norms, both for myself and then making sure I understand what everyone else's is. It definitely helps the just overall running of a case and team mechanics to have that be out there. So I think those are two pieces for me that are pretty crucial to get to right away. And sometimes it may be on you to kind of drive that conversation and make sure it's happening, especially if you're joining a case that's already going. Sometimes it can be not forgotten, but it's less top of mind for you to share out some of those preferences. Looks like we have a question here from Anshul. Is there a specific framework / protocol you follow as a consultant at BCG when initiating a case specific to a particular industry, or is it leveraging the knowledge networks and researching? Mike, I'm going to punt this to you.
Yeah.
I feel like this is probably more of a project leader question anyway.
Oh, thanks for that. Aren't you going to be a project leader in like a week?
These are considerations I don't have to think of yet.
No, that's fine. So anyways, I think it's a good question. I would say it very much, God, this is a lame answer, but it will depend on the case. So there are particular projects that we will do where we have like a very clearly defined kind of process and procedure for this is how we do X. And we have kind of a playbook. So like post-merger integration is one of them. We've done them a lot. We have a lot of tools. And so it becomes more about, okay, here's our kind of baseline of tools that we would particularly use. Here's some analogs of how we've done it elsewhere. And then you kind of work on, okay, like how do we customize and make that work in the client context? Because there's always, little ones and twos that are different across different clients. I think there are certain cases that are a little bit more open-ended. So as an example, like the case I did in Nigeria was kind of a portfolio strategy for upstream oil and gas. So, basically like which of their deep water drilling assets should they invest in, which projects should they pursue, how should they think about different oil prices, high and low, how should they think about different crude qualities, those sorts of things. Quite frankly, we didn't have anything off the shelf for that. And so it was kind of incumbent upon me and the team to figure out how we would approach it, to kind of get a sense of what the actual problems were, what we were actually trying to solve, and then develop kind of a framework or an approach that would help them think about it and approach it. So, it is very different depending on the type of work that we sell and the type of project that you're going to be doing, but, can be one or the other. I think, I would say we're probably, and I think most firms that I've heard are going this way too, trying to develop more and more of the kind of like, this is our process, this is our model, these are kind of like our offerings. But I think there's always, every time it's always different. There's always different ones and twos and nuances at clients that make you kind of rethink some of that stuff. So I don't know if that's helpful or answers the question, but hopefully got close. Sure. Love it. Thanks, man.
Cool. So if no other questions, we can skip ahead. And again, feel free to jump in at any point during this with other things that come up. Mike, maybe I'll take a crack here first and then pass off to you. But, I think, this is the ultimate, it depends answer, right? Each case is just going to have a different set of skills that you flex on, and, some different pieces of work will just drive different demands out of a consultant. There's just that reality. I think the consistency, when you think about what will be the same case to case, is kind of how you want to work with your team and your manager. And I think that's where, certainly some of those teaming considerations I mentioned in the first piece become especially critical. Is you want to make sure that you're set up for success already with that stuff, and make sure that you're on the same page as much as possible before actually even worrying about the work. And I think this is where, as a consultant, managing your work, whether it's building a model and super quantitative, or doing a bunch of customer research interviews and synthesizing those into something parsable, no matter what the actual work is, I think the key pieces of it is to make sure that you're working internally to make sure that, what you're doing is clear with your manager and you're on the same page consistently. So I think over communicating there is pretty critical. That's something that I've found to be super useful, is, whether it's a sign off email every day explaining what you've done and what you're pushing on, or just, 15 minutes to huddle, throughout the day with your manager or team. I just think just keeping that transparency as to what you're working on and where you're headed is super critical. So I think that's one thing that is consistent across projects. I also think in terms of client interaction, that's another place where there's some level of consistency. And I think that's where, certainly clients bring us in because there is an expectation around, how we'll work and what they'll see. But I think, there will be variability in terms of how much client time you get. But I think the big thing that I've found at BCG, and Mike certainly, maybe there are differences with what you've seen, but it certainly is it's a partnership throughout. It's not, hey, go solve this and come back to us in 6 weeks. Clients like to be involved, and they like to see the progress of the work and have input and guide it. And honestly, that's where you get to a better endpoint too, is if you have the people who are actually living this work and know some of the ins and outs a little better than we do coming in from the outside. You're working with clients who have often been at their organizations for decades. So I think leveraging their expertise as much as possible and what they know about the organization, and putting that into the work and some of the problem solving frameworks that we utilize, that's where you actually get to the really solid results. So I think that's the other piece for me, is just thinking about how you collaborate with your client team as actively as possible. And again, that will differ project to project. There have been some teams where, we've had tons of client time. Like I rolled off a project about a month ago where the clients, it was 4 to 5 hours a day of workshops. Usually, like they really wanted to be co-authors and were actively a part of it. And it was great to get that feedback. So they were super involved. Other times you're working with more senior folks who may have, an hour every few days, and you have to make the most of that time you have and make sure that you're really directive with the input you need. But I think in all cases that I've seen, again, Mike, call me out if you've seen differently, but there's got to be that collaboration piece, and you have to find ways to incorporate, the institutional knowledge that clients have.
Yeah, Bennett would agree. I think for me, a couple of things that are common, I think, across most projects is, one, I would say definitely the client interaction piece and what Bennett mentioned would echo that. And then two, I think is what you're really doing at the end of the day is you're solving problems. And I think that's, can mean a lot of different things. And at the macro level, that's what we're doing. But I think even at the micro level, right? So if you think about like, okay, I want to answer this question, I want to look at these 3 things and I want to do these 3 sets of analyses, and then we'll know, well, like, in step 1, and okay, it seems easy, but like in step 1, turns out they don't have the data you want. And like, it turns out, so like, okay, now you need to think about, are there 3 or 4 other ways I can do, or I can kind of try to get to the same answer. And so even like on a day-to-day, like hour-to-hour level, you are consistently thinking about, okay, what's the endpoint I need to get to? Where am I right now? And then how do I kind of navigate around the roadblocks? Because, if it was, to be quite honest, if it was like pretty simple to do, they wouldn't hire us to do it. So like, I think it's mostly about kind of getting around roadblocks and continually kind of having a solution oriented kind of mindset. So that would be the thing on like the day-to-day basis. You know, you definitely want to have a plan, and you want to have kind of an approach at what you're taking, but you do also have to be flexible in like things come up. Things don't always necessarily like work out the way that you want them to. The data doesn't necessarily show what you thought it would, and so maybe you rethink the answer. You know, those sorts of things do happen. I do see the question from Ethan. So curious what success looks like to you and to BCG as a whole. How do you and the firm define success? That is a tricky question. I kind of want to punt it to Bennett, but I will take my thought. I'll just give you kind of my off the top thoughts. I think success for me, at least, and for most people I've talked to, is different for almost everyone. I think different people optimize on different things at the firm. So some people on a personal level, you know, would say, okay, I know that I love a particular kind of work. And so whether that's organizational transformation, or whether that's, you know, digital or agile, or, you know, I like a particular industry, and success for them is all about that kind of work, getting to the right project outcome, really enabling kind of our clients to move forward, and helping them, you know, build and become better companies. And so that kind of what drives a number of folks, and, you know, people that really kind of focus on the work. And then I think there's a second subset of people that index kind of around people, and so they find, and I think I'm probably in this camp of, you know, they find people that they like to work with, and they'll say, look, you know, the things that mean the most to me are kind of what we've been able to accomplish as a team, and the fun we've been able to have working together. And so, you know, I think for a lot of people, for a number of people that I've found, that's kind of the case for them. And then I think there's probably a third subset of people that have said, look, you know, I like, you know, having a sustainable life, or I need to stay at home, or, and obviously that's easier now in COVID than it was before, but, and so they optimize around kind of personal life, and success for them is, look, you know, I might take projects that are more local, and that means I might not be able to work on the industries or the topics that I'm 100% interested in. But success for me is being at home at 6 p.m. to have dinner with my kids and put them to bed. And so I think that you know, differs for every person. In terms of how the firm defines success, I think it's mostly about you know, driving impact and improvement at the clients that we serve. And so I think there's two elements of that. I think one is kind of getting to the right answers, and saying, okay, how are best practice companies doing these sorts of things? How should you think about these problems to be innovative and do things that maybe no one else is doing right now? So that's one. And then I think two, which I think has become kind of more and more important as part of our business model, is how do you make those answers actually come to life? So it's very easy to kind of put together a deck and say, oh, this is what you should do, and this is the direction you should go. But I think, you know, actually kind of making sure that happens, giving clear kind of roadmaps and plans for what's actually achievable, and kind of deepening those relationships to say, okay, we'll continue to support projects and continue to support, you know, implementation of that, to actually make it real, and drive actual results for you guys. I think would be the two kind of prongs of the success element that I think BCG certainly is looking for. And I think for us, we define success through our client success. So like, I think it's very much like, you know, our success as a business is almost secondary and downstream of, you know, our client success. And so, you know, generally I think if we do what's right by them, and we, you know, get them to, you know, improve and continue to kind of drive towards, you know, best in class, you know, our business kind of takes care of itself. And so that's what I would say. But I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
I think that's a great answer, Mike. And I totally agree on all of that, especially the individual definitions of success. I think everyone does that differently. I think that's what kind of guides the staffing strategy for a lot of folks is, you know, understanding what they're optimizing for. And then there's different ways to go about it, depending on what that is. I guess the one piece of your answer, Mike, that I would drill into a little bit is, you know, I think there's an inclination when you think about what success for BCG as a whole looks like to say, oh, happy clients. We're in client services. We want our clients to be happy. And obviously, fundamentally, the answer is yes, we do want our clients to be happy. But I've seen multiple occasions where the clients have a certain viewpoint on solving a problem, and our viewpoint is at odds with it. And we've seen it work elsewhere differently, and we feel like we have a perspective that would benefit the client that they're just not seeing for whatever reason at that time. And I think that's a big reason why clients bring us in, is to push their thinking and to challenge them when we do see an opportunity that they may not see. And I think I've been impressed with our ability to push back in a tactful way and to provide, solid reason behind the view that we have, to say, hey, we could do it this way. Like, we understand why you have done it this way and why you're seeing it this way now, but we've actually gone and done a little deeper digging, and we see this alternative that we actually think would drive more value. So it's not just coming into a client site and saying, oh yeah, we'll do what you want us to do. It's actually thinking outside the box and making sure we're bringing in, an opposing viewpoint if and when conditions permit. So I think that's one key add there, is that, it's client services is not just about fulfilling client desires. It's about thinking and pushing them and being a strategic advisor in that way.
Yep. And Nigel, you'll see the question on dealing with conflicts. My last case was actually, I don't want to say adversarial, but fairly difficult in that context. I can certainly a little bit. I mean, I think sometimes, it's always respectful. I think it's always, you just say, look, this is our position. This is our understanding. This is the way that, we've seen other companies do it. This is the way that we would recommend you do it. And sometimes we're able to convince people. And sometimes, it becomes kind of agree to disagree. And ultimately, they decide to do, what they wanted to do in the first place. But a lot of times I think it's, you work through with them to say, hey, how can we develop, help us understand why our perspective doesn't work, and why, your particular kind of context or situation, wouldn't necessarily apply. And how can we develop kind of an approach that sort of, is what we call them, that project, like a hybrid approach, but basically thinking about, okay, what's best in class, what's kind of BCG's perspective, and how can we kind of tailor or apply that into what we know works for us. And so, oftentimes it becomes kind of a, hey, let's hammer out the finer points, and you sort of land somewhere in the middle. And so there are certain things where it's like, all right, yeah, we were able to get them there, and certain things where it's like, well, they're still kind of, entrenched, and sometimes, quite frankly, they understand their context and what they're willing to do, better than we do. So I would say that, a lot of times it just becomes about kind of the best idea wins, and you hope that that's the case. And I'd say it becomes hopefully about getting to agreement and bringing the best thinking forward.
Yep. Cool. Why don't we jump to the last piece here as we think about how wrapping up a project looks. And Mike, this is another place where I think I've rolled off of almost, that's not true. There's one project that I actually wrapped, but otherwise I've rolled off midway through. So I don't know what your experience has been in terms of concluding work, but maybe you want to kick us off here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, in terms of the process for determining roll-off dates, and I think it generally, at least on the projects I've been on, you kind of see them through from front to back, because I've been on, I guess, some shorter ones. And so, you get a sense of, okay, what are the deliverables? When are we sort of finished? And you get sort of very clear on, this is exactly what we're going to deliver at this time. And, if there are any follow-ups, there's usually some sort of shadow team that hangs around for a week after, to say, okay, how can we answer any additional questions? How can we potentially talk about, if you guys need additional support going forward, how we would do that? And those would be, I think, the best practice activities that I would think of, is just, in terms of wrapping up, just being very clear and over communicating with clients and with your team about, hey, here's where I am and here's what I plan to deliver. And just making sure that kind of, a big part of it is enablement for clients to take it forward. So, it almost becomes, in the last couple of weeks, about kind of co-creation. If you use any Excel models, making sure that the clients understand them, and that they can use them going forward. Making sure that, materials are clear and there aren't any questions about kind of what we meant when we said X or where we got particular data, just kind of resolving all those things. Because ultimately, what you don't want is for it to become, some presentation or model that goes in some folder somewhere and sits on the shelf collecting dust. I think what you really want is for it to kind of come to life, and for people to feel like, okay, I own this, I believe in it, and it's my kind of job to take it forward. And so that's will be kind of my best practices. But I think in terms of Ben, I'm sure you have probably more to speak of on like how to do the handovers with ongoing stuff. Unfortunately, I haven't done a ton of that.
Yeah, certainly spot on. I think everything you said there, Mike. In terms of, I think as an individual thinking about, maybe I'm on a longer term case and I want to try something different. That's a situation that I've been in. I was at a client for about 7 months, and BCG has a rule. I don't know if rule might be overstating what it is, but it's generally accepted that if you've been someplace for 6 months and you do want to try something different, the staffing team will usually work with you to get you off your current case and move somewhere else. And I think there certainly are exceptions where that may not work out, but in general, the idea there is that, at our core, we're a generalist firm and want to get consultants that broad set of experiences that they come to the firm to acquire. So that's one way to prompt a roll-off day, is just to say, hey, I would love to try something different. This has been a great experience, but looking for just some variety. So that 6-month grace period is a nice feature for us. I think, when you roll onto a project, a lot of times if it's a longer term project, you'll start with, either a 2 or 3 month planned stint. And those end dates are often very fluid. So there's an expectation that if things are still going well and that the project is still going, that you'd likely be asked to stay on. I think continuity is something that every team and every client team likes. So I think it's very rare where if an arrangement is going well on both sides, that the clients and the internal team won't want a consultant to stay on for longer if they can. So I think that's kind of the piece on the individual side. And I think to kind of buffer Mike's comments on kind of wrapping up a case, I think just being super explicit with everything here is the name of the game, as you make sure that everything you've created is transferable to the client. My summer internship, I was helping wrap up some work in which we built a pretty complex deal scoring tool for a sales organization. And the process of building out the instructions for how to use the tool took multiple consultants, multiple days. Like, it was a very explicit, long, drawn out set of instructions. But the whole goal was, hey, when this is sitting around for a couple of weeks and we're not there, let's make sure that this is still valuable to the client. So I think that's kind of the overarching thought in wrapping up activities. And I think whether it's for the client or for the next consultant coming on, as explicit as you can be with how to use the materials you've built, I think that's always a useful thing. So I think that kind of brings us to the end of, or Mike, I don't know if you want to hop in, but it's also open to very general questions here about anything consulting, BCG related. And it looks like we have a couple coming in that I can punt to Mike right away.
That's great. Yeah.
It looks like
Geraldo, biggest opportunities and challenge facing BCG right now. So I would say, in terms of like very, very present moment, definitely the COVID, model and pretty much everything that's going on. I mean, we're not traveling anymore, to be honest with you. And so all of our work is done remotely now. And so it does create a number of challenges in terms of how do you a lot of our work is just like, oh, you can just go walk by somebody's desk and say, hey, what do you think about this? Or can I, you don't have to be as explicit. And so I think the challenge is, how do you kind of engage people in the right way, make sure you're still kept in the loop, and sort of, navigating the work from home dynamic is difficult. I think the other kind of big, macro challenges for that is, as economic activity goes down, just because of the nature of the COVID thing, we're always going to, feel that as well. And so I think it becomes, how do you, and I think we've done fine. We're doing, actually, I think just as well as we did last year. But it does become a challenge in terms of, how do you execute kind of big, large programs with, a remote working model. So even coordinating amongst the BCG team is hard, because normally what we do is you sit in a room every day and with, the entire team. And so if you have like a quick question or you want to stay coordinated with another team, it's much easier versus, just everybody sitting in their house and working that through. So those would be, I think, the biggest challenges. I think, going forward, I think that becomes kind of an opportunity for us because, I think most people felt for a long time that I think the future of what we do is probably more remote. and that we probably don't need to fly as much, certainly when we think about kind of our carbon footprint, but also just in terms of, our delivery model. And so I think this kind of forces some of that and forces some of those conversations. So I think it is an opportunity for us to think about, even kind of as we look at our own business model, how do we reimagine it, and how do we think about when we absolutely need to be on site versus when we could potentially stay at home and hopefully kind of create a better work-life balance for people. But then I don't know if you want to jump into the to that one or the second one, but I can defer to you.
Oh,
Second one's tough.
yeah.
I'm happy to do it. If you want to do the third one, you can go for it. But
I'm going to meld the second and the third, but quickly on the opportunity piece, I think another element there is just, this is an unprecedented time in the world. And I think just looking across the BCG landscape at some of the projects that are running, it's a lot of support for COVID related concerns. And I just think, I have not had the opportunity to work on a COVID specific strategy case, but I do think the work that's being done is obviously really important, whether it's for organizations or for local municipalities. I think there's just a lot of value to be gained with some of that thinking. So I would like to think that, BCG is being helpful as clients try to navigate this really unique and unprecedented time. Jumping to the next couple questions. So one is, what parallels have you seen between consultancy cases and legal cases? And then the next one is, what qualities do you see in a potential consultant candidate at BCG? I have no idea for the first one there, because I'm not a lawyer. So I'm going to attempt to meld these a little bit. We do have a bunch of folks who come in with legal backgrounds. Actually, one of my close friends at the firm he went to law school, was a lawyer for about 3 years, and then joined BCG. So it's actually a very common path into the firm. And I think that cuts to the second question in terms of, what is BCG looking for in consultant candidates? It doesn't really matter what your background is. And I guess I didn't give a full intro at the top, but I was a professional poker player pre-business school. So certainly no business experience, no reason why BCG should have wanted to hire me. But I think the larger point here is, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a PhD candidate, whether you're a professional poker player, what BCG wants in a candidate is someone who's taken on problem solving and has a structured approach to it, but has done it in a variety of different arenas. It doesn't really matter if you have domain area expertise around, telecom or whatever else. The goal is just to get people who are willing to tackle those problems and think creatively and in a logical way. And so I think, there's an active push on the BCG side to bring in people from different backgrounds, because that's kind of what makes the team environment really pop, is when you have people who have done totally different things in the past come together and tackle a common problem. So I totally punted on that first question there, because I don't know, I couldn't speak too intelligently to connections between being a consultant and being a lawyer and solving those problems. But I do think that there's a lot of overlap. I think everyone I've talked to at BCG who comes from a very different background has in some way found ways to connect their past life to what they do at BCG. Certainly that's something that I had to think a lot about, thinking about the connections between poker and consulting. But Mike, I don't know if you have anything to add on either of those two questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the legal field in general, I know a few. I think I would say for us, I don't see too many parallels, and I know some people that came from legal backgrounds, and I think what they enjoy is getting out of. I think what a lot of my lawyer friends do is, okay, how do I kind of make sure that this contract is appropriate? How do I go through and kind of make sure I flag the risks the right way and make sure we've covered all our bases in a lot of the language. And again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't necessarily know, but that's kind of my understanding of what they're doing. And how can you structure deals effectively to kind of implement what the business or the person wants to do, depending on whether you're working on the commercial side or on the individual side. And I think, our work is probably what I would consider upstream of that. And so basically it's saying, okay, how do you decide what the best path is? And then from the legal side, it's how do you best get there? And how do you kind of, whether it's being tax efficient or whether it's kind of avoiding liabilities or those sorts of things. That's sort of how I would see it. I don't know if that's helpful, but I think it's I more see kind of like legal and finance as kind of downstream, and not to say that it's, it's equally as important and certainly equally difficult and equally challenging. But I would say, is a little bit downstream of the kind of stuff that we're working on.
Cool. I think we have 4 minutes. If anyone has any parting questions, if not, can kick it back to, we got a couple coming in. Looks like from Teddy, what kind of software do you use at BCG, like Microsoft Office, or is it more specialized software? Good question. We, certainly use the Office suite for email and calendaring and all that. From a video conferencing perspective, we were a WebEx client for since I've been here during my summer, probably since Mike's been here. We still have WebEx, but I think the Zoom craze got to us. So everyone got Zoom about a month or so ago. I'm not sure. I'm still a WebExer. I default to that, and I've seen my teams do that. I don't know if that's common across BCG. I think some teams are using Zoom now. And then I think beyond that, the two pieces of software that we use pretty regularly that are worth calling out is Tableau. And I put a plug in for anyone who is interested in that to take some courses in it. I know Emily has worked to get some things set up on that front. I hope I'm not promising something that doesn't exist, Emily, but that's a really useful tool that we use a bunch. And then relatedly, Alteryx is kind of an advanced version of Excel that funnels inputs into Tableau. So if you have a pretty large data set, that's often a useful tool to help parse and make some sense out of those. So those are the two add-ons that I'd call out, Mike. I don't know if you've used anything additional.
No, yeah, I think that's right. And then to Rachel's question, I think a couple things that I would say, were really helpful in terms of tactically, like the courses. I think doing being proficient in Excel and VBA was helpful for me. I think Excel more so, but VBA has also always been kind of a helpful one. So would definitely call that out. I think just having that is, I would say, almost table stakes for the job. Just being able to know what everything does, I think it helps you kind of get up the curve. So that's one. I think in terms of the activities, I would say like case prep was particularly important, and really helped me kind of get my head around, how to solve problems, how to kind of segment things out into kind of, bite-sized chunks and actually put together a problem-solving approach. So I thought that was actually quite useful, and something that prepared me really well. And then I think, for me, the way I thought about courses, I'll give a plug to McCann's courses too. We didn't get them in the second year, and I think they're talking about internship. But I think, managerial decision making was great, and strategy stuff was awesome as well. And so, definitely to keep thinking about, how you manage trade-offs, how you think about strategic problems is always important. And then the last piece I would say, in terms of picking courses, I would say business school is a very unique time where you should do what you are interested in and do what, would get you excited and, you actually want to take. And so I always discourage people from trying to feel like they're filling up a course load or a set of coursework that prepares them for a particular outcome or a particular career. I think you should, as much as possible, try to take stuff that interests you and let that guide you versus saying, okay, I need to, get this, that, and the other thing. But those would be the ones I would say. Bennett, I don't know if you've got anything. I know we've got a minute left, but anything else to pop on there?
Yeah, the one last quick add I'd make is lean on the people who have gone through this before. So the second years are awesome resources. I had some guy named Mike Foster who helped me a little bit. It was kind of a tough job for me, but use the people there. They're awesome and have done it before. And then the other thing I would say is just use the CMC. Courtney, Emily, Heather, they're awesome. They've helped tons of people navigate this process, helped me a lot, was both a therapist and a career counselor. So use them. They're there for a reason and they're willing to help. So those would be the two adds.
Yeah, Bennett needed a lot of therapy. So still does, but now he's got to pay for it.
Cool. I think we can kick it back your way, Scott.
Cool. Sounds good. Definitely want to thank Bennett and Mike for sharing an hour with us today. I know you guys got a lot going on, so appreciate you squeezing us in. For all the first years, I have been told that we will get this on CareerSpace for 2021. So I think that's a course within Brightspace. So I think you have Brightspace access by now. So if you missed any piece of this recording or, just want to, I don't know, watch it again to catch up on a couple things, we will have it available on CareerSpace. But other than that, I think that's all we got. I look forward to meeting you guys here in a couple months on campus.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.